my shows, I'm watching them from a booth or from the sound booth or something like that to look for people that look into it, there to have a good time, but also look for people that want to have a good time, but they don't want to be involved. And sometimes people are forced to sit in the front and they think they're going to be picked on, where you can read body language, you can read it from the stage, you can just ask them one question, you can tell they won't want to come up. And those people that you want to ignore, there is a line with body language.
You'd be conscious that, I suppose, if you embarrass an audience too much or make them too nervous about being plucked from the front row, it can backfire?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that just comes from you being able to read that person. And like I've had that in the past, where you've picked a guy you thought was, that was going to be really great, like an extrovert on stage, and turns out he was just doing that with a date. And as soon as you put something confronting in front of a crowd, because being in front of a crowd, is quite confronting for someone that doesn't do it for a living.
Yeah.
They can all of a sudden become quite nervous and quite scared. And you do have to be very careful.
Jared, thank you for joining us. Jared Fell on the panel about Quidam. Now, the New Hampshire primary in the United States, before we go. Mark, New Hampshire has a Zealand Valley. I don't think it's named after New Zealand, probably.
It's Old Zealand.
Old Zealand Valley. Anyway, it's got this tenuous relationship with this country. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have cruised to victories. Trump 18 points clear of the pack, which was even slightly more than the polls were showing. Jeb Bush's vote up into respectable territory. Rubio down to fifth, I think, on the last count after his strange gaffes in the last debate. And Bernie Sanders, 13 points clear of Hillary Clinton. How do you read this result?
Oh, well, I lived through 3 elections in the States, so we spent a lot of time watching them. I think this one it's interesting. I mean, it's difficult to imagine a world where Sanders wins the Democratic nomination, so everyone is turning towards the real horse race. And there, I think it's going to come down to which of the governors can no longer stay in the race. And whoever's left standing, particularly if now Rubio's in trouble, whoever's left standing is going to be quite viable. So if it looks now like it might be Bush, he'll get some more money, he'll be able to stay on the road, whereas the kind of Kasich's of the world will increasingly drop out. And whoever's left sort of in the sort of man-on-man struggle against Trump, that's where we'll see it interesting by the time we're a little bit further down the primary track.
So you think Trump might be there close to the end?
Oh, he will be, I think.
Okay.
I mean, just the pure media energy that he's managed to attract is going to keep him at the front. And of course, the primary is designed to mobilise not the kind of centre of American votes, but the kind of hardcore of parties. And if he can particularly pick up some of the Tea Partiers, which he seems to be able to in some of these votes, then Cruz is in trouble, and all of a sudden Trump looks like he could be the man. And as scary as that may be to many of us, it's probably not the scariest person that the Americans ever sent into a presidential election.
That's right. Mark Ingalls, your assessment of it?
I think it just really, for me, it illustrates how different our cultures are and how different the whole system is. And, it's just struggle to get your head around, when they group together in, Damon, what are they called when the
colleges?
Yeah, the colleges.
The electoral colleges?
Yeah, the electoral colleges.
Or the caucuses, yeah.
Yeah, the caucuses, when they actually group together in a room, it's just like, guys, the world leader, what are you doing here? And so for me, it's I just hold my head. I hold my head.
It'll be interesting now if, off the back of how Hillary's doing, the billionaire Mr. Bloomberg decides to stand.
I think they're all waiting to be called into the field of play, and people say Romney is too, but no one is calling out their names, so I think they'll probably stay right there on the sidelines.
Mitt, come back. Damon Sylvester, thank you very much for your company today. And Mark Ingalls, thank you for being on the panel too.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, everybody. We're back tomorrow. Checkpoint with John Campbell follows.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint with John Campbell on RNZ National. Tonight, the IPCA and the SPCA, very separate obviously, but are they both underfunded? And if so, what does that mean? Apple Are they avoiding tax, or is it just really expensive to do business in New Zealand? I use my iPhone to try to ask them. 40 square metres, 1 bedroom, 5 foreign students flatting there, the apartment market in Auckland, sharks off the Kapiti coast, and Trump and Sanders, it's out with the old and it's in with the old who are new. Lots on Checkpoint tonight, and while we're still a radio program, of course, a reminder you can watch us on Freeview 50 and the RNZ website, and if you do so, you will see Katrina Batten reading the RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Independent Police Conduct Authority says it hasn't investigated some complaints of excessive force by police because it doesn't have enough money. The authority appeared before the Law and Order Select Committee this morning. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The IPCA's Group Manager of Operations, Warren Young, says there have been cases it hasn't investigated, including cases of excessive use of force by the police because of financial constraints. Those cases were handed back to the police to investigate, but the Greens say that leaves the police in a difficult position, as if they do a good job, nobody will believe them, and if they do a bad job, their integrity is at risk. The Justice Minister, Amy Adams, says she thinks the authority is adequately funded for what it does. She says it hasn't asked her for any more money, but if it does, she will work through the request with it. From Parliament, Chris Bramwell.
A High Court judge has found a woman and her lover planned the murder of her husband and carried it out in a brutal and callous way. A jury found Amandeep Kaur and Gurjinder Singh guilty of the murder of Kaur's husband Devinder Singh. Today they were sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Defence lawyers for the pair had asked for a maximum sentences of 12.5 years, but Justice Lang said the facts warranted a higher sentence.
The feature that marks your offending out from so many of the cases is that it combines both a degree of premeditation and prior planning and callousness and brutality in the manner in which the fatal wound was inflicted.
Justice Lang says the pair wrote notes to each other planning how the murder would be carried out, and Devinder Singh had been stabbed 13 times, including multiple blows to his throat. In the United States, Donald Trump has won the Republican primary election in New Hampshire, and Bernie Sanders has beaten Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party contest. It's a huge win for Mr. Trump that rekindles his presidential hopes, and a big loss for Mrs. Clinton. Our US correspondent Simon Marks reports.
This time round, the polls were right. A big win in New Hampshire puts Donald Trump's campaign for the Republican nomination back on track, and a win for Democrat Bernie Sanders puts Hillary Clinton firmly on the back foot. The other surprise of the night, Ohio Governor John Kasich looks like he'll come second in the Republican primary, giving him a chance to claim that he's the moderate who can eventually win the race.
Simon Marks reporting. Auckland City commuters are facing delays after a track fault near Britomart Station. Auckland Transport says a signal fault has led to delays across all the line services from the central station. Trains are still leaving every 20 minutes and will be until at least 6 when crews can access the fault. The bus company whose drivers took industrial action in Auckland says today was business as usual and there was minimal disruption. Hundreds of NZ bus drivers are unhappy with what they say are long hours, poor conditions and low pay. They worked to rule today, doing things like taking their scheduled breaks and making sure passengers are seated before driving away from stops. Swimmers have been forced out of the sea on the Kapiti coast north of Wellington after 5 sharks were spotted in the area. Kapiti Heliworks owner and pilot Dennis Young, who was flying near Peka Peka and Waikanai beaches, was the first to spot the sharks. He says they were about 200 metres away from nearby swimmers.
Certainly travelling along the coast towards where the swimmers were, so we had no hesitation to land to warn those swimmers that that's where they were. And then, like I say, we went down a bit further south and it was the same thing again, and they were certainly right where the people were swimming. So, as far as the distance goes anyway.
Helicopter pilot Dennis Young. Emergency workers have rescued 2 kayakers who got stuck in mud near Herald Island in northwest Auckland this afternoon. One of the kayakers who tried to walk ashore but got stuck waist deep in the mud was winched out by helicopter. In sport, the New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko says her latest accolade is added motivation to win gold at this year's Rio Olympics. Ko, who's in Christchurch this week for the New Zealand Open, has won the Lonsdale Cup, which is awarded annually to the New Zealand athlete or team who made the most outstanding contribution to Olympic or Commonwealth sport. The world number one says it's an honour to win such a prestigious award.
It's something that I'm really proud of, especially because Olympics is a huge goal of mine, so it just all connects, and it gives me more confidence about the Olympics and the proud feeling to represent New Zealand.
Lydia Ko. Turning around the result of the one-day series rather than any hangover from the controversy of the final ODI in Hamilton is the motivating factor for Australia ahead of the two-test series against New Zealand starting in Wellington on Friday. Discussion in the wake of the Black Caps 2-1 series win in Hamilton has centred on the controversial dismissal of Australian batsman Mitchell Marsh after he was caught and bowled off his foot by Matt Henry. But aggressive Australian opener David Warner says there won't be any hangover from that incident. Rather, the tourists are more disappointed at losing the series.
The battle out in the field has been very good. I think it's been fantastic. We love playing against New Zealand. We always love coming here and playing. Vice versa, the boys like coming over to Australia. So, that series is done, and it's now about moving on to the test matches. And that's what my focus is, and I know that's what our team's focus is. So we've moved on from that. The right decision was made at the end of the day.
Australian opener David Warner. And that's the news.
Schools, universities, kindergartens, education covers a lot.
Our own specialist correspondents.
We're falling in international league tables and tests.
Who will take you closer to the story?
There are big question marks over school deciles and special education. Funding is a big issue.
Focused, accurate, passionate.
Somebody's got to make sense of it. I'm John Gerritsen and I'm Radio New Zealand's education correspondent.
On air, online and now on iHeartRadio. RNZ News.
Met service weather now to midnight, Northland to Waitomo tomorrow, Northland to Waitomo, Taihape and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods at night, isolated showers from afternoon, some possibly heavy. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers clearing this evening, then fine, afternoon showers inland tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, also Wairarapa, Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine apart from cloudy areas in Wellington and southern Wairarapa tomorrow night. Fiordland, periods of rain developing tonight, mainly about the fjords. Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly sunny today, isolated afternoon showers in South Canterbury tomorrow, becoming cloudy about the east coast later. Otago and Southland, rain developing in Stewart Island late afternoon, scattered falls spreading north overnight, isolated showers inland tomorrow afternoon, some heavy in eastern Otago. The Chatham Islands, cloudy today, sunny tomorrow. It's just gone 5:08.
Thanks, Katrina. See you in 22 minutes. Let's begin with the police watchdog tonight, the people who police the police, a safeguard against undue force and abuses of power. But we learned today they've had to forego investigating some complaints of excessive force by police because of financial constraints. The Independent Police Conduct Authority appeared before the Law and Order Select Committee this morning, telling MPs it's been running operating deficits for the past 4 financial years, which has put big pressure on its cash flow. What does that mean? Well, here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The IPCA's Group Manager of Operations, Warren Young, says the authority has been living on its reserves, but it has used them up now. He says there have been cases it has not independently investigated because it does not have the resources to do so.
There have been occasionally matters that we've referred back to the police where if we'd had the resource we might have investigated, including, for example, excessive force cases. But the ones that we regard as critical cases and most significant, we do always independently investigate.
Dr Young says the IPCA gets about 2,500 complaints a year, all of which are important to the complainants.
But ultimately it is important that the police take responsibility for some of those matters as well. And that's why we have a practice of referring a lot of cases back to the police with our active oversight.
The Green Party's police spokesperson David Clendon says that puts the police in a difficult position.
If they do a good job, nobody will believe them. If they fail to do a good job, they're neglecting their own integrity is at risk there. I think it's simply unacceptable that they should be put in that position. The IPCA was established for very good reasons. It's performed very well over a number of years. I think it has a very high level of public confidence, and that's what we're putting at risk.
The Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, says the public can be confident those investigations the police undertake themselves will be done properly.
We take really seriously any complaints about our staff behaviour, and we investigate all of those things. And we hold our people to a high level of account, and those investigations are managed very, very well. So you can have confidence.
The Justice Minister, Amy Adams, who has responsibility for the IPCA, says she thinks the authority is adequately funded.
We've been watching, obviously, its operations. They've seen an increase in low severity claims, but actually the most expensive, the most serious claims have actually been tracking down, if anything.
Ms Adams says every agency would like more money and to do more.
Some of their financial pressure is due to some corporate decisions they made. They were paying 2 lease costs at the same time because they didn't get that quite right. So I'm comfortable that they've got a good level of funding for what they do. And look, when they've had large-scale difficult inquiries, we've typically given them extra one-off funding to deal with that.
Amy Adams says the authority hasn't asked her for any more money, but if it does, she will work through the request. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
Yes, we're just trying to get hold of the Minister now to discuss this at greater length with her. We'll let you know what her office says. It's 11 minutes past 5. We're going to stick with agencies charged with holding people to account, but increasingly having insufficient resources to do so. In this next case, it's the SPCA. Yes, they care for animals, and yes, you can go there if you want a new cat, but they're also the organisation that prosecutes more animal welfare cases than anyone else, more than the MPI, more than police, more than anyone. And when they run out of money, cruelty to animals goes unprosecuted and continues. We come to this discussion off the back of the SPCA's prosecution of animal hoarder Ann Power. There have been numerous complaints against Ms Power. The SPCA has devoted significant resources to prosecuting her. Indeed, they seized more animals from her yesterday. Now, the Auckland District Court has found Ms Power ill-treated a horse that died a slow and painful death, but Ms Power appealed. After a 2-year wrangle, the court ordered the SPCA forfeit some of her animals, but she was allowed to keep 83 animals and birds on compassionate grounds. SPCA Auckland CEO Andrea Midgen told me about their most recent trip to Ann Power's Whangarei property.
Just yesterday, we took 38 dogs. And we've taken other animals over the years. So we've taken horses, we've taken dogs, we've collected dead sheep, a duck, and I think that's it for now.
If you had your way, in the best possible world as the SPCA sees it, would Ann Power own animals, be able to keep animals?
No, she does. She has a love for animals that is very clear, but she does not live in the real world in terms of being able to take care of animals. An example would be that the dogs we uplifted yesterday, a lot of them have cancer. One was just disgusting, a big growth with a length of string tied around the growth, and that was the only care that dog had received, and it was in a lot of pain.
Okay, so what you are kindly saying is that there is a marked discrepancy between her belief in her ability to care for the animals and her actual care for the animals.
Absolutely correct.
And yet, if I look at a list that I have in front of me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, she has been allowed to keep 4 horses, 11 cattle, 18 sheep, 4 llamas, 4 dogs, 40 birds, and 4 cats on compassionate grounds. Is that the case?
That's correct. That's what the District Court judge sentenced last week.
Should that have happened?
I think from the judge's perspective, he was trying to be fair and not take away her whole world. From our perspective, we have seen her whether consciously or unconsciously mistreat animals over the years, and it's ongoing. So the question that needs to be asked is, can she even cope with that many?
When you go and get animals from Ann Power, what sort of nick are they in?
It varies. So the last time we seized a chunk of cattle and we sold them, mainly because there wasn't enough pasture to feed all the horses, llamas, cattle, sheep that were on the property. Right now, to be honest with you, she has sufficient feed for those animals right now, which is why yesterday we went and got the dogs as the number one animal welfare concern.
Where are those dogs now?
We've got those dogs in temporary accommodation and we're assessing them, so we have to go through full health vet checks and also temperament checks. But you can imagine there's 40-odd dogs. They've been confined basically 23 out of 24 hours in fairly small cages. They're very stressed, very upset. Moving them is not that helpful, but it's the only way we can manage this number and bring them down to Auckland and deal with them.
Is there a possibility you'll have to put some of those dogs down?
That's a real possibility, yes.
Okay. A law lecturer at Otago University said last week to RNZ News, and I think this is a fascinating point, he talked about the SPCA having to bring these prosecutions and then in some cases having to spend your own money to fight appeals. This is an example, AMPOWERS is an example, and he says it's quite remarkable that the government has delegated that responsibility to a non-profit organisation that relies largely on charity. In other words, are there simply some cases that you can't afford to pursue as much or as rigorously as you would like?
Absolutely, we have to prioritise, and so we go for the ones which have caused the most harm and then work our way down until we've run out of resources. So we're very, very fortunate in Auckland that we get amazing pro bono lawyer services, so that allows us to do a lot more than some of the other SPCAs around the country. But even with that, you can imagine the amount of time it takes to go through such prosecutions. So every time we're doing one, inspectors are off the road because they're in the courts and preparing files and things like that. So it's always a balancing act as a charity. That's our life.
Andrew, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it fair to say that there are cases you would like to prosecute that you don't have the time, resources or money to do so?
Yeah, and to be honest, there's probably ones out there that we haven't even seen yet, but we know are out there, that we just don't have the resources to be more proactive and go looking. So often it's around, the public are fantastic in terms of providing information which triggers off our investigations often, and thank goodness for that, because we don't have enough on the road to be proactively checking on different sites.
What would you like to see happen?
I would love to see more funding from MPI. I would love to see a faster judicial system somehow, because what happens is that these animals are held by us in a shelter through that whole process, which can take months, if not years. And this latest one of AMPOWERS has been in 2 years, and animals in a shelter is not a great outcome. They need to be in there, in a home, not in a shelter. It's kind of like being in a prison, really. I mean, as good as we can make it prison, but that's what it is.
Because if we come back to the point of the law lecturer at Otago University, you are effectively doing the government's work. You are effectively the prosecuting agency here. So you would like more money from the Ministry for Primary Industries to help you with that.
That would be brilliant.
And Midgen, from the SPCA, we're already receiving an enormous amount of feedback. We want to tell you that AMPOWERS, 70 complaints over 13 years, the SPCA has been looking at her. Of course, when they take a prosecution against her or against anyone, they pay for it, although there is an enormous amount of pro bono support from lawyers, particularly in Auckland. And when someone appeals, they also pay for that too. Is that an appropriate state of affairs? Lots of feedback coming in. We will bring you some in a moment. But first, what a fascinating contest this is turning out to be. It was out with the old breed of politician and in with the new in New Hampshire today. What's fascinating, in part, although the whole business is really, is that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, the new, have a combined age of 143. Yes, the rebuttals to America's political establishment sure come with some miles on the clock. Still, riding a wave of voter anger, mistrust, cynicism, you name it, at traditional politicians. Billionaire Donald Trump won the state's Republican nod, and US Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont won the Democratic primary. RNZ's political editor Jane Patterson is in chilly Concord. Jane, wrapped up New Hampshire, joining us now from outside. Is that snow behind you? By Skype. Jane, where were you tonight?
So I was at John Campbell post-results party, and that was just winding up as the results were starting to come through. He's an interesting one. He didn't really feature at all in the Iowa race, but he spent a lot of time down here in New Hampshire, 100 or so meetings, and that's really paid off for him. He came in second today, but the main talking point today, Trump and Sanders absolutely romping home ahead of their nearest rivals.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm just reading The Guardian. Donald Trump sweeps to victory in New Hampshire. And their opening paragraph, Donald Trump, once an object of mockery and scorn by many in the political establishment, has won the New Hampshire Republican primary. This is really big in that context because people love to ridicule him. He is, I think, in many respects, obviously open for it. But he's starting to do it, isn't he?
He sure is, and you can see that support really starting to gather momentum as the other states come through. Of course, this is just the very, very start of it. And I must say the same's been said about Bernie Sanders. Commentators saying, if you told me a year ago that Bernie Sanders would be plus, interesting dynamic here, John, in terms of the, I suppose, anti-politician, a very similar audience that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are pitching to. They are people who are really angry about what's happening in Washington on Congress, and also people who are not happy about the big money influence too in American elections. Donald Trump self-funding, Bernie Sanders primarily raising money from small fundraisers from supporters. So they've really come through with a big group of independent voters, probably a larger group of independent voters here than in other states. And I think it was really summed up by a woman I met today, and she voted for Donald Trump. She actually voted for Barack Obama in the last 2 elections, but she said she really liked the message that Donald Trump was giving. She said she found him a bit abrasive when he first came out, but she's got used to him now. Think here who you are. He'll take you on.
Jane, Jane, we might give you a call back because I want to hear more from you. Jane Patterson, the Skype is just dropping out from, where is Jane? Concord, New Hampshire. So we might give Jane a phone back and just talk to her on the phone if we can get a good phone connection. What's fascinating is that Hillary Clinton beat Obama in New Hampshire the last time they competed against each other in a primary. So not only is this a big win for Trump, it's a bad loss for Clinton, although some of the pundits are saying don't get carried away here because New Hampshire is a protest vote. They vote early and they tend to go against the political establishment. Sanders and Trump are obviously a manifestation of that. But gosh, it is fascinating. Only Iowa and New Hampshire down, though. It's too early to start reading the tea leaves yet, although, by golly, it doesn't stop people, does it? 5:23. The smartphone-based driver service, Uber, says the government should be making it easier for it to operate. Not harder, of course, they would say that. But Uber has released its submission on the Ministry of Transport's consultation paper, which looks at new rules for passenger services such as taxis, shuttles, dial-a-driver and ride-sharing apps. Everyone lobbying to have their way here. I asked Uber's Director of Policy, Brad Kitschke, what problems it had with the paper.
Look, I don't think we object to the suggestions in the review. What we think, though, is that the review hasn't covered some pretty simple and pretty important issues.
Like what?
And that is the time and the cost for the administrative processes that it takes for someone to get the appropriate licences. So at the moment, it can take cost up to $1,500 for someone to get a licence and go through the appropriate checks. It can also take up to 12 weeks. And 86% of the people that we refer to that process don't complete the process because it takes too long and because it costs too much. And
why should Uber drivers have a lower bar than taxi drivers?
So it's not about lower bar, it's about achieving the same outcome in a different way.
Well, it's about different standards, isn't it? You want different standards and different requirements.
No, that's not what we've asked for. We actually think that the same requirements could apply to the whole industry.
Roger Heel of the New Zealand Taxi Federation wrote for the Dominion Post last year and basically says, you guys are simply trying to absent yourselves from any form of responsibility. And I quote, if there are problems with the Uber driver service, that has nothing to do with Uber, as that's entirely the driver's responsibility. Quote again, Uber is not legally liable if something goes wrong with the Uber driver's service. Is he correct?
No, he's not correct. And I think that the Taxi Federation needs to sit back and think about perhaps advocating a positive story about its own industry rather than try and throw stones at somebody else's. We have a very good safety record. Everything that we do is pitched towards safety and making sure that everything is transparent and fair. And that's all we want for a consideration of a ride-sharing model in New Zealand.
You see, Brad, I guess the issue is, where are you?
Sorry?
Where are you now? Where am I talking to you?
Today I'm in Melbourne. In a couple of weeks' time I'm back in New Zealand. Tomorrow I'll be in Adelaide. My areas of responsibility cover all of Australia and New Zealand.
Right, whereas if I was talking to your equivalent in a New Zealand taxi company, he or she would probably be about 800 metres away from me. Do you see the point that, in a sense, Uber, which is a tremendously successful model, is also trying to stamp a multinational template? And what I guess the ministry is saying is, we need to have some caution around this. We need to make absolutely sure we know who we're dealing with, we know the passengers are safe, and we know we can get standards which mean the drivers are appropriate.
So I don't think, first of all, I think that the ministry is completely aware that we have staff that operate our businesses in New Zealand.
How many?
How many? Officers. We have about 15 now in New Zealand. We have a general manager who runs our business in New Zealand. We have driver operations team. We have marketing team. We have staff both in Auckland and in Wellington where the business runs. So I don't take that point. I think that we are a New Zealand business. We're a local business. We employ local people in the marketplace. And to the second point with respect to safety, what we're saying is you can achieve the same safety outcomes, but following different processes that are more efficient. You can skin the cat in more than one way. And if you can introduce a process that is more efficient, that is easier, but still achieves the top line, headline safety requirement, transparency requirement, and consumer protection requirements, then government should consider that, because if you make it safer, if you make it cheaper, if you make it more reliable, then it opens up economic benefits to both drivers and consumers, and you can still achieve those top-line safety requirements.
So what would you change, first and foremost?
So what I would change is the way in which the background checks occur. At the moment, as I say, it costs $1,500. You can get a passport quicker than you can get a licence to drive a person around in New Zealand. I wouldn't change what's checked, but there is a process that can be undertaken through the Ministry of Justice, where the Ministry of Justice can undertake the background checks rather than the process that occurs at the moment. And they can do those checks in about 6 days, rather than somebody waiting up to 72 days for a check to come through the current process. That's a really simple change. It's still conducted by the government. It still meets the requirements. But what it means is that you take a whole lot of time and a whole lot of cost out of the process.
And submissions on the paper looking at the future of so-called small passenger services close on Friday. Uber are trying to get into Christchurch too, by the way. Beachgoers north of Wellington are being warned to stay out of the water after sharks were spotted along the Kapiti coast. Kapiti Heliworks owner and pilot, Dennis Young, spotted 5 sharks while he was working near Peka Peka and Waikanai beaches up the coast from Wellington up the west coast. I asked Dennis to describe what he saw.
Well, it was an interesting event. We were southbound coming to join the Paraparaumu Airport when we were looking I was looking around. I had my student that was flying the aircraft. We were looking down through the water, and we saw a sand trail, and at the end of the sand trail happened to be shark number 1, and it was quite interesting. And then another one appeared, and another one appeared, and then 2 more after that, and a couple of them were in close proximity of some swimmers. So we landed for the first group and advised them that there were sharks in the water. So they removed themselves, and we just trucked on a few k's further to the south, and same thing again. And they were all very, very close to the shoreline. I estimate between 50 to 75 metres.
Wow, you fly up and down that Kapiti coast all the time. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Never.
Have you any idea what sort of shark they were?
Well, I'm no shark expert, but I could imagine that being the time of year and the plentiful amount of stingrays there are around at the moment, more than likely they would have been bronze whalers, and I've estimated in length between 2 to 3 metres.
So fairly sizable sharks.
Absolutely, certainly take a good nip out of you.
Yeah, they would, and out of the poor stingrays too. How close were they to the swimmers, Dennis?
Well, we probably about the closest one got was probably about 200 to 300 metres, but certainly and travelling along the coast towards where the swimmers were. So we had no hesitation to land to warn those swimmers that that's where they were. And then, like I say, we went down a bit further south, and it was the same thing again, and they were certainly right where the people were swimming. So, as far as the distance goes, anyway, off the shore.
What's the weather like up the Kapiti Coast? So it's beautiful, isn't it?
It's beautiful.
Oh.
We've got a nice light south westerly today, and people want to get in the water and cool off a little bit. So, yeah, you can certainly understand that.
Would you be going in yourself to cool down today, or would you just keep away for the time being?
I think I'll give it a miss, yeah.
Dennis Young from Kapiti Heliworks. Katrina standing by with headlines, but first quickly, residents living around Dunedin's Tahuna wastewater plant say a stench filling their houses needs to be fixed urgently. The plant has received 24 complaints about a rotten egg smell, I think that's putting it politely, which has been spreading in waves around the area since last Wednesday, but the plant's manager says he's baffled about why the pong has returned. Here's Ian Telfer in Tahuna.
Marie Vince has lived a few hundred metres from the plant for more than 20 years. She says the smell, known as the pong, had got better, but this week it's back worse than ever. She says she and her husband have had to turn off the house ventilation system at night because otherwise the smell fills up the house.
I've noticed that when it gets hotter, it goes away for a while and then it comes back. But the last few days we've been away, but just before that it was really terrible, and then we come home and it was bad too. Yeah, because I haven't got a very strong stomach and it sort of turns, yeah.
What does it smell like to you?
Rotten eggs.
This was meant to be a thing of the past because the Dunedin City Council run Tahuna wastewater plant was upgraded as part of a $200 million overhaul finished 2 years ago. But walking around Tahuna today, whiffs of those rotten eggs came and went with the breeze. Sonia Hill lives opposite the plant on Tahuna Road and says last Thursday was the worst she's experienced.
That really hot day, the Thursday, yeah, that was pretty foul. I was going to have a barbecue that day, but it rained, so I didn't have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you would have been having second thoughts because of the smell?
Oh, well, I know it would have been a topic of conversation.
Sonia Hill says it's not very pleasant, but she's trying to stay positive.
If it went on too long, I'm sure it wouldn't go down quite so well. But I've been here 4 years, and I think this is probably the longest it's ever lasted, and it's probably only ever happened 2 or 3 times. As long as they're doing something, and we know that they're doing something, then we just let them get on with it. That's my opinion.
2 schools are also within a few hundred metres of the plant, Tainui School and Tahuna Intermediate. Tahuna's principal, Tony Hunter, says he doesn't believe the pong's a health hazard, nor overly bothering any of the staff or 500 pupils. But he admits it got bad enough last week to phone up and complain again.
You don't want that smell in your environment. End of story. You shouldn't have to put up with it. They've obviously gone through a resource consent process to have the treatment plant there, and they've got certain air quality conditions that they should be living up to. They're obviously not meeting those when we're, getting residents complaining, including ourselves.
The plant's manager, Chris Henderson, says the rotten egg smells hydrogen sulfide gas, which is meant to be removed by bacteria that eats it. But that's not happening. Why not?
Well, that's the thing, I don't know. I've got a couple of theories. It's obviously the bacteria that's in the biological odour filters has obviously died off. It's not doing its job. Initially we thought this was basically as a reaction to the fact that we had 9 days of rain and then we had some hot weather. So we've corrected all those issues and we've cleaned out all the drains and we've blasted out and inspected all the pipe work. We haven't been able to find a problem. So now I'm in the process of going further back up the actual process, or back into the plant itself, into the source, just looking for possibilities of what might be causing the issue.
At least 6 staff are full-time on the problem, plus a number of external contractors. But during my visit, alarms went off showing hydrogen sulphide had built up to dangerous levels and the workers were temporarily evacuated. Chris Henderson says he doesn't know when the pong will be gone. He says all he can do is wholeheartedly apologise to the community and promise fixing it is his top priority. In Tahuna for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Coming up, the Auckland landlord looking for 5 international students to share 2 bunk beds and a single bed in one room. And Materia Tude takes a 4-week sabbatical to learn te reo. She joins us just before 6, but first here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Independent Police Conduct Authority says it hasn't investigated some complaints of excessive force by police because it doesn't have enough money. The authority says 4 years of operating deficits have put significant pressure on its cash flow. Its Group Manager of Operations, Warren Young, says occasionally matters have been referred back to the police that it might have investigated if it had the resource, including cases of excessive force. He says, however, any case of the authority regards as critical are always independently investigated. The SPCA says it's collected several dogs with cancer from the property of an Auckland woman after a court ruled she had to give up dozens of animals. Anne Power was found guilty of ill-treating the 32-year-old horse found dead on her Coatesville property in 2013. The SPCA Chief Executive Andrea Midgen told Checkpoint 38 dogs were removed from her care yesterday. Ms Midgen says one dog was in a lot of pain from a growth left untreated on its body. In the United States, Donald Trump has won the Republican primary election in New Hampshire, and Bernie Sanders has beaten Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party contest. While the win rekindles Mr. Trump's presidential hopes, it's a big loss for Mrs. Clinton. A High Court judge has found a woman and her lover planned the murder of her husband and carried it out in a brutal and callous way. A jury found Amandeep Kaur and Gurjinder Singh guilty of the murder of Kaur's husband Durvinder Singh. Today they were sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Auckland City commuters are facing delays after a track fault near Britomart Station. Auckland Transport says the delays are across all of the line services from the central station. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and headlines.
Thank you, Katrina. Let's turn to business now with Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan, welcome. Big result for the ASB.
That's right, they had their 6-month result to the end of December. First cab off the rank for the reporting season that we told you about at the start of the week. Record profit, $474 million. That's up 7% on the previous year. That's due to growth in lending and growth in deposits too. But the bank has highlighted pressures. Their interest rate margin, or that's essentially their profit margin, has fallen. That's due to low interest rates and low fixed rate loans. The bank's also highlighted weaker dairy prices and just general risks to the rural sector as concern. As a result, they've had to increase the amount they put aside for bad and risky debts by $4 million. That's now at $41 million. So coming back to that profit result, 7% rise, you'd have to say for a bank that's pretty respectable.
Yeah, what was it for the half year? 470 mil, was it?
It's 474 million, yeah.
Extraordinary. We have Sky City out tomorrow as well, Jonathan.
That's right, first locally listed company to report. They put out some guidance back in January about what they expected for their first half. They expect in the range profit $69 to $71 million. That would be up from the $55 million the previous period. Now, that growth would generally come from the New Zealand businesses performing well. You've got those high rollers obviously going into all the casinos. We'll have to see tomorrow whether they were right with their guidance. So 69 to 71 million. We'll keep an eye on that for you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. We look forward to that. We were talking briefly yesterday about Japan. How are the international markets? What did Wall Street do off the back of Japan?
Wall Street actually at 9 o'clock this morning, it was up a touch. It closed down a touch, so pretty flat for Wall Street. Red ink very much everywhere, John, most of the day. That volatility continues. But the rate of decline that we've talked about in previous days, the Nikkei 5% yesterday, it's down about 3% at the moment, so the rate of the decline not as much as previous days. Well, our market, that's ended down less than 1%, 52 points to 6019. The dollar trading relatively stable, 66.1 US cents, 93.75 Australian. And John, just to note, markets are watching for some comments from Janet Yellen tomorrow. She's going to be speaking at the Financial Services Committee and then the Senate Banking Committee over the next couple of days. Remember we had those non-farm payrolls data out last week, weaker than expected. So you could say, whether or not the US can handle another interest rate rise. We had the first one in nearly a decade last year. It could be a bit longer until we get the next one. But all will be clear hopefully tomorrow morning when we hear from Janet Yellen.
That's Janet Yellen from the Fed. Yeah, we look forward to you telling us about that tomorrow. Thanks, Jonathan, so much. Jonathan Mitchell, who is joining us every night this week from Wellington. Staying with business a bit longer, we return to Apple, or attempt to. Yesterday, Apple New Zealand released their annual financial statements for the year ending September 25th last year. We noticed that their cost of doing business in New Zealand are about 95% of their revenue from doing business in New Zealand. Now, there's nothing illegal about this, nothing. But Apple, along with Google and others, have been very much in the spotlight elsewhere for what the OECD is calling, in part, BEPS, which is base erosion and profit shifting. It's a form of tax avoidance that the OECD estimates costs the world as much as $240 billion a year in lost tax revenue. In very simple terms, broad brushstrokes, profits are declared in low tax territories, costs are met in higher tax territories. The OECD has called this, and I quote, flagrantly unfair. Now, is Apple doing this in New Zealand, or is New Zealand just a very expensive place to do business? The only way to find out is to ask them. And I've been trying to do so for 4 months. I had another go in person today, and this time I took my iPhone. This is the PricewaterhouseCoopers Tower, PwC. I'm about to get into lift A and go to the 15th floor, which is where Apple New Zealand is located, although it doesn't say so on the sign in the foyer. Obviously a very low profile here. Apple earned $732 million in New Zealand last year. That was their revenue. They've just posted their financial statement with the company's office yesterday. $732 million worth of revenue, but $701 million in costs, meaning they can only pay tax of just under $9 million. So just over 95% of Apple's revenue here in New Zealand is being spent on costs. And I've been trying for months now to ask Apple what those costs are. How is 95% of their New Zealand revenue being gobbled up by costs? And to find that out, I've come to the Apple New Zealand office. It's been difficult to find, or there was a man. He came out and then kind of ran away. So this is the Apple New Zealand office, $701 million worth of costs. It's Wednesday morning, and it's locked, there's no reception, and the people inside who saw me ran back and desperately don't want to talk. Now, I can understand why. Their media people are in Australia. Despite there being $700 million worth of costs in New Zealand, there are no media people here. So let's give them a call and see if they can explain how 95% of their New Zealand revenue goes on costs.
Good morning, Apple. Kylie speaking.
Hi Kylie, it's John Campbell from Radio New Zealand in New Zealand. I'm wondering if it would be possible to talk to Tony King.
I'm sorry, it's not available at the moment.
Would it be possible to talk to anyone about the annual financial statements for the year end 26 September? They've just been released in New Zealand today. This is for Apple Sales New Zealand.
Okay, you'll need to speak to someone in our corporate communications team. If I can just put you on hold for one moment.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, this is Kristen.
Hi, Kristen. It's John Campbell from Radio New Zealand in New Zealand. How are you going?
I'm very well. How are you, John?
Good, very good indeed. Kristen, who can I talk to about Apple Sales New Zealand's annual results for the year end 26 September 2015? They've just come out today.
Oh, okay. Let me get your phone number and contact details, and I'll get the right person to give you a call straight back.
So that was yesterday. They didn't call me back yesterday. I went to their office today. No one wanted to come out and meet me. I called them again today, and they still haven't called me back, which is very peculiar, but we do look forward to hearing from Apple. 5:44, Amandeep Kaur wiped away tears from her eyes as she was told her son will never forgive her for killing his father. The jury found Kaur and her lover Gurjinder Singh guilty of murdering Kaur's husband following a trial in November last year. Today the pair was sentenced at the High Court in Auckland to life with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Our court reporter Edward Gay was there and he joins me now. What a nasty, nasty case. So they killed Gurjinder Singh and then they blamed each other. Sorry, Gurjinder Singh and Amandeep Kaur killed her husband and then they blamed each other for the murder.
Yeah, that's right. Amandeep Kaur's defence was that she admitted planning this murder, and that included where, when and how that would take place with Gurjinder Singh. But she says she pulled out of this plan and that on this night back in August 2014, she and Devinder Singh had pulled over to the side of the road. They were chatting in their car when Gurjinder Singh pulled up behind them. He approached their car and began stabbing Devinder Singh. On Gurjinder Singh's part, he says that by the time he got to the car, Devinder Singh had already been stabbed. Today, though, Justice Lang found that while Gurjinder Singh likely carried out the physical act, Amandeep Kaur probably held her husband down, and she was also involved in this planning, and that they were equally to blame for the murder.
Absolutely premeditated. They discussed in advance the whole 9 yards, but the defence and prosecution lawyers were way apart on what the sentence should have been, Edward.
Yeah, that's right. Defence lawyers Dave Niven and John Armstrong for the defendants, they were arguing for a sentence of 12.5 years in prison, minimum non-parole. Crown prosecutor Natalie Walker, she said that should be up to 18, and she pointed to this level of planning that involved these notes going back and forth between the pair at their workplace. She also pointed to the brutality of the attack that included 13 stab wounds, including multiple slashing at Devinder Singh's throat. Justice Lang agreed, and he said that it warranted a sentence of 17 years non-parole.
The court heard from Devinder Singh's family back in India?
Yeah, that's right. The victim impact statements were read by victim support people. One of those included Devinder Singh's mother, and she Sukhvinder Kaur is her name. She's looking after the Amandeep Kaur and Devinder Singh's son. He's 13 now. And she said
his mother killed his father.
That's right.
Oh, goodness.
That's right. And she said that in her statement that this boy will never be able to forgive his mother for what she's done. She also spoke of how the family had relied on Devinder Singh sending money back to India. Now they're fully reliant on Devinder Singh's younger brother, who's a telephone repairman in India, for that financial support.
Edward Gay, what a tragic case. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Right, 30 minutes to 6. Auckland University estimates international students should expect to spend about $8,000 a year on rental accommodation, or just over $150 a week. But there's a real squeeze on for rentals in Auckland. One Auckland landlord told us students studying in Auckland are spoiled if they expect to have much of their own space in the current housing market. The landlord, who did not want to be named, is looking for up to 5 international students to rent her one-room apartment as a group for $460 or as individuals for $92 each.
I've looked on the website, Trade Me as well, and most of the apartments are double beds, and they're not really catering for any students.
So your point of difference is that you cater for what, foreign students?
Any students, but we're like foreign students know the bit of a hardship of living in Eastern countries, so they sort of don't mind sharing rooms.
When you say Eastern countries, what are you talking about? What countries are you talking about?
Just overseas students, but I just sort of really wanted to be out of the media because we only a little we only own one apartment in Auckland, and that's how it's set up.
Okay, so how many is that a one-bedroom apartment at the moment?
Yeah.
And how many people in there now in that one bedroom?
Oh, there's only 4.
Only 4 in the one bedroom. One bedroom, one bathroom. How big is it?
It's about 40 square metres.
Right, and so 4 people, but you can have as many as 5.
Well, by arrangement we can to just help them with their finance.
Right, that's fairly crowded, isn't it?
They got bunk beds.
Right, so there's 2 bunk beds and 1 single bed?
Yeah, well, they turn the lounge into a bit of a bedroom with screens, like bed settees. But they're all different. They're all working night shifts, and they're not all at home all at one hit.
And is there demand for that?
We're not on a big scale in Auckland, and we just happen to rent it out because this university is just down the road.
So you sense there's a real demand for people who are prepared to live as many as 4 or 5 to a room?
It's cheaper they make the decision. The students make the decision.
Right.
Yeah. If they're the same nationality, it's all right because it's like their little group.
Right, but they make the decision, but you put the bunk beds in for them, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, 40 square metres, 5 beds in a single room. Life for foreign students if you want to rent there in Auckland, $92 a week. 10 to 6, time for your feedback. Lots of it coming in. Put taxi drivers to the test of passenger feedback. More would fail than Uber drivers would fail taxi licences, says Penny. Veronica points out the woman in Whangarei with all these animals obviously has an issue around her ability to care for them. Where were the psychiatrists who could assess whether this woman was sufficiently in touch with reality to understand the implications of caring for so many animals? Veronica asks. And Paul is near the Tahuna treatment plant, and the smell at our place can be revolting. We've complained to the Dunedin City Council. Yeah, it couldn't be much fun living next door to that. Let's talk sport at 9 minutes to 6 with Matt Chatterton. Lydia Ko back in New Zealand to defend the New Zealand Open title, which she won. Put your chair up, yeah?
I'm feeling a bit short here.
Sorry, Matt, hold on. Stand up. I've got it. It's this one here.
Oh, you got it?
No, I don't know what's going on here.
Sit down.
Okay. Straight back, your mother would say. Early today, the 18-year-old was awarded the Lonsdale Cup, which is awarded annually to the athlete or team who made the most outstanding contribution to Olympic or Commonwealth sport.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk about her. I won't even read the intro. She's remarkable, this young woman, isn't she? What was she talking about today?
Oh, she was talking about being back in New Zealand, obviously, and her goals for the year, and the Olympics is a big one for her because, she's only 18, she's grown up watching the Olympics, and I mean, there are a few golfers out there that don't know if golf would work in the Olympics because, they've been playing it for a number of years, like the pros on the men's tour that have been playing golf 20 years. They're not sure if it's going to work quite as well as some of the majors that are played on the men's tour. But in the women's tour, because Lydia is so young, she sees the Olympics as this really golden opportunity, excuse the pun, and she's really excited to be taking part of it. And today, receiving the Lonsdale Cup, sort of really added to that motivation. And she was actually asked about, how motivating this Olympics is, and this was her reaction to it.
Ever since they announced that golf will be in the Olympics, I said, hey, I want to get myself on that team. And it's I think for any athlete to say that you're an Olympian, that's just a whole new proud feeling, and to represent your country at such an international stage, I think it's going to be a pretty special week. So even on the LPGA, there's so much excitement and vibe around it. So I think we're all super excited.
So yeah, you can really tell, that this means a lot to her receiving this award, and I mean, obviously she's here for the New Zealand Open this year.
She keeps coming back. She keeps coming back.
She does. She really loves coming back here. I mean, she won it in 2013 as an amateur, and that was a really big deal, because back then she was so young and doing such remarkable things on the LPGA Tour and here. And then she didn't win it in 2014. She was pipped at the sort of last hurdle by a South Korean girl who ended up shooting 8 under in the final tournament in 2014. Lydia had a good round herself in the final round, but this girl just came out from nowhere and blew her out of the water. But she's back here again to try and make it 2 in a row. And actually, before I forget, I should mention also, there is a particular reason why she keeps coming home, and she actually got quite emotional when she was asked about it.
When I won here for the first time, Patsy Hankins was there, and getting emotional. She was there, and we did the trophy shot together, and oh man, I think so. You know, there are so many great memories. So especially when there are so many great memories, you kind of go back to it and you think back to it. It doesn't matter where you are, and just with her, she's such a special person. So to be there, my first time winning the National Open, it was pretty special.
Yeah, now there is a particular reason Lydia got quite emotional there talking about Patsy Hankins. Patsy unfortunately passed away last year, and she's quite a remarkable woman herself. She's been on a number of boards in New Zealand and on the international women's golf scene. And in fact, last year in February, she was actually one of the first women ever to be included in the RNA's membership. That's over in Scotland. That's the first ever golf course in the world over in St Andrews. And she was one of the first women, along with Dame Laura Davies, who's done a lot for women's golf in the European Tour and the LPGA Tour. So it was, quite obviously sad for Lydia thinking back on that, because Patsy unfortunately passed away last October.
Lovely that Lydia's celebrating her. What a class act Lydia Ko is, Matt Chatterton.
She is indeed.
Matt Chatterton, who talks sport wonderfully, always off the cuff, with an extraordinary first-hand knowledge of whatever sport I raise.
Well, to be fair, golf is my sport.
Oh, well, so's rugby, so's basketball, so's football. Talk about it all.
Man of many talents,
Yeah, and lovely and tall too. Let's go to, I wasn't objectifying him, and it was just that his chair was short when he came in. I think it's important we pointed out that he's not that size in real life. Green Party co-leader Matiria Ture took 4 weeks sabbatical leave from her parliamentary duties to learn te reo Māori. On her return to the Beehive yesterday, she delivered her first speech for the year to Parliament in Māori. Matiria Ture joins me now. Tēnā koe, e hoa.
Kia ora, John. Ngā mihi I tō rā whānau. Kia koe.
Well,
happy birthday.
Yeah, well, look, thank you so much. Thank you. I did Māori for a year, and every time I went back to class, it took me the first half of the class to get back to where I'd left the previous week. And in the end,
it's hard.
It's hard. But how'd you go?
The first 4 weeks were fantastic. My tutor, Kellyanne Tahitahi from Otako, she's amazing. But it is really hard to keep it going. That's the thing. It has to be a constant journey. I've tried to learn in the past and always failed to really get the next step. So yesterday's whaikorero in the house was about trying to push myself that little bit further. It was amazing.
Yeah, and so tell me about your background.
Well, I'm a child of the 70s. I was born and raised in Palmerston North. There wasn't this revitalisation of te reo. I was kind of a generation that kind of fell into the crack, really, between the old styles and the kind of new revitalisation. So I don't have any background in te reo at all. Tried to learn it at school and things, but it really is trying to pick up from, really no real background in it.
And was that an absence you felt very keenly?
Yes, and especially now as a Māori woman leader and one of the senior Māori women in Parliament, there is an expectation that I can respond to people who want to hear the reo from me, and I'm wanting to learn now because I want to be able to be responsive to their needs for that leadership. Heaps of people have said to me since that I've been an example for them about learning and being brave about speaking even if you don't know a lot, and I think that's important too, that those of us in public positions, that we are open about the fact that we are learners and learning is good, learning is okay.
It's sometimes when you hear orators, and I'm thinking of Julian Wilcox, ex-Māori TV, when he speaks I understand about 10% of what he's saying, but the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. I mean, the great Māori orators are just magnificent, but it's also intimidating speaking in front of them, isn't it? Because you want to be good and you aren't as good as you want to be.
Yeah, that's right, it can be. So, actually Julian has been a mentor for me through this process, and he will continue to be so, and that's fantastic. But that's the thing, I want people to know that we can put ourselves forward and we can take the risk and speak our reo, and that there are people around us who will be really supportive. And so, if I can do it in public, then we can all have a go in private in our own little ways. There's nothing to be fearful. This, for Māori especially, this is our reo. We're entitled to own it, we're entitled to learn it, and we should feel really proud of doing that, even if it is hard and scary.
Did you feel proud in the House yesterday?
Oh, I did. I was shaking, and I'm really shy about it too. Like everybody, I'm nervous about getting it wrong and embarrassing myself and embarrassing others, but there was an amazing amount of support, so I feel real renewed vigour for it now, and I hope other people do too, from kind of me putting myself out there a bit.
Yeah, congratulations and thanks for joining us. And I look forward to hearing you speak more of it.
Kia ora. Me koe. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora, Materia. Materia Ture, who is learning Māori and was brave enough to speak it in Parliament yesterday. It is beautiful to hear that language spoken well. Remember, it is an official language of our country, along with English and sign language. Lots of feedback coming in. Hi, John. It would be simple to solve the tax problem created by Apple and others. Create a revenue as opposed to income tax. Thus, tax is paid on every dollar earned with no exemptions for expenses. If all businesses were under the scheme, I understand they would pay about 9%. Regards, John. Yes, Pascal Sanaman, who is in charge of all the stuff for the OECD, is working on something. Actually, the G20, surprisingly enough, are really going into bat on this. There is a high degree of unanimity and support for something that combats this base erosion and profit shifting. The OECD, including New Zealand, who have been part of this, are working to combat it, and it is stuff along those lines, John. It's 6 o'clock on RNZ. You are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Wonderful to have your company. Thank you. Tonight, the new genetic engineering technology that could wipe out disease-carrying mosquitoes. So you can destroy the mosquitoes, but is there a cost in environmental terms? Are they part of the food chain? These are bigger issues than would appear on the surface. We're going to explore them. What's it really like being a bus driver in Auckland? What are their working days like? And how so-called hay bale hotels are being used to encourage whitebait in Christchurch. But first, RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The police watchdog says lack of money has meant it hasn't investigated some complaints of excessive force by police. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has today told the Law and Order Select Committee it's been running operating deficits for the past 4 financial years, which has put big pressure on its cash flow. Its Group Manager of Operations, Warren Young, says the authority has been living on its reserves, but it's used them up now. Dr Young says the IPCA gets about 2,500 complaints a year, all of which are important to the complainants.
But ultimately it is important that the police take responsibility for some of those matters as well. And that's why we have a practice of referring a lot of cases back to the police with our active oversight.
Warren Young says any cases the authority regards as critical are always independently investigated. The SPCA says it's collected several dogs with cancer from the property of an Auckland woman after a court ruled she had to give up dozens of animals. Anne Parr was found guilty of ill-treating a 32-year-old horse found dead on her Coatesville property in 2013. An SPCA investigation found the horse had an untreated skin infection and gum disease so severe it starved itself to death. Parr was ordered to give up dozens of animals but can still keep up to 85, including 4 horses. The SPCA Chief Executive Andrea Midgen told Checkpoint 38 dogs were removed from her care yesterday, many in terrible condition.
A lot of them have cancer. One was just disgusting, a big growth with a length of string tied around the growth, and that was the only care that that dog had received, and it was in a lot of pain.
Andrea Midgen says if it was up to her, Power wouldn't get to keep any animals. A High Court judge has found an Auckland woman and her lover planned the murder of her husband and carried it out in a brutal and callous way. Amandeep Kaur and Gurjinder Singh were today sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years for the murder of Kaur's husband Devinder Singh. Justice Lang said the pair wrote notes to each other planning how the murder would be carried out, and Devinder Singh had been stabbed 13 times, including multiple blows to his throat. Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Bernie Sanders have shaken up the United States presidential race with decisive victories in the New Hampshire primary. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who beat mainstream Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton, said his victory showed people wanted real change. Mr. Trump and Mr. Sanders have both made rallying against mainstream politics central to their campaigns. An apartment owner has listed her one-bedroom flat in Auckland for rent by up to 5 international students. She's advertising the apartment near Auckland University for $460 a week, or $92 per tenant. The woman says her 40-square-metre apartment has bunk beds and the lounge can also be turned into a bedroom with screens. The The landlord told Checkpoint that the apartment would appeal to foreign students who can't afford high rents and are willing to share. The woman says students studying in Auckland are spoilt if they expect to have much of their own space in the current housing market. The smartphone-based driver service Uber says the government should be making it easier for it to operate, not harder. Uber has made its submission on the Ministry of Transport's consultation paper looking at new rules for passenger services such as taxis, shuttles, data driver and ride-sharing apps. The paper was released late last year. The company says to become a driver is already too expensive and time-consuming. Its Director of Policy, Brad Kitchker, says the government needs to change the rules for background checks and licences. He said that would have achieved the same basic outcome but follow different processes that are more efficient.
You can skin the cat in more than one way, and if you can introduce a process that is more efficient, that is easier, but still achieves the top line, headline safety requirement, transparency requirement and consumer protection requirements, then government should consider that.
Uber executive Brad Kitchker. Auckland City commuters continue to face delays after a track fault near Britomart. Auckland Transport says a signal fault has led to delays across all services from the central station. Crews will start fixing the fault shortly. In sport, the Black Caps can't afford to follow the same script as their Australian tour when they begin the 2-test series against Australia in Wellington on Friday. New Zealand lost the 3-match series in Australia late last year 2-0 after the poor start in the opening test in Brisbane. They were competitive in the second and third tests in Perth and Adelaide respectively, but fast bowler Tim Southee says they need to stamp the authority early on.
We didn't start too well in Australia, but I think the second half of the series we bowled a lot better, and it showed you when we get it right we can be very dangerous, but just shows you a little bit off, then sides can capitalise on that. But yeah, coming back to conditions that we are familiar with and we've had a lot of success, it's always a nice feeling.
Tim Southee, one of the last 8 tests between the two sides in New Zealand, Australia's won all but one. The Black Caps' last victory at home against Australia was at Eden Park in 1993. Meanwhile, misbehaving cricketers could be sent from the field or immediately penalised 5 runs under new rules being trialled by the MCC. The game's official lawmakers are asking leagues in England to trial the new provisions this year in an effort to clamp down on the game's apparent declining behavioural standards. In sailing, Peter Burling and Blair Tuke have won their opening race at the 49er World Championships regatta in Florida. And the Kiwis hooker Isaac Luke will make his first appearance in the Warriors jersey this weekend against the Gold Coast Titans in their NRL pre-season hit-out in Whangarei. That's the news.
How much profit to prompt a pay rise?
We've offered a real wage increase.
OK, what was your profit, Shane?
To remain competitive.
What was your profit?
You can go and check that out yourself, Guy.
Will 2 million buy a beach?
It's been a tricky one in terms of that figure being bandied around. It's always been a tender situation.
Happy ending.
She just gave me a big cuddle and, yeah, we had a cuddle and a cry and it was good. Good to have a home.
Everywhere you need to be. Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, leading British economist John Kay on reforming the financial sector. And after 10, we meet a woman who left London city life behind to become a husky dog trainer in remote northern Sweden. Join me, Catherine Ryan, from 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waitomo, Taihape and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods at night, isolated showers from afternoon, some possibly heavy. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers clearing this evening, then fine afternoon showers inland tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, also Wairarapa, Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine apart from cloudy areas in Wellington and southern Wairarapa tomorrow night. For Fiordland, periods of rain developing tonight, mainly about the fjords. Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly sunny today. Isolated afternoon showers in the South Canterbury tomorrow, becoming cloudy about the east coast later. Otago and Southland, rain developing in Stewart Island late afternoon. Scattered falls spreading north overnight. Isolated showers inland tomorrow afternoon, some heavy in eastern Otago. The Chatham Islands, cloudy today and sunny tomorrow. It's almost 9 minutes past 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Have a lovely evening. Scientists are exploring new genetic engineering technology that could wipe out disease-carrying mosquitoes. This is remarkable stuff. The technology which snips through genes to force a genetic change could drive the Zika mosquito to extinction or make them unable to spread disease. It isn't a quick fix or a cheap one, but it could be faster than a vaccine. The question is, if you exterminate a species, what are the consequences of them disappearing from a food chain or from a particular habitat? Do even the nastiest creatures serve some positive purposes? Well, Kevin Esvelt is a gene driver researcher at MIT, the famous Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who's working on all this stuff. I spoke to him a short time ago in Boston via Skype video, and I asked him whether it is possible to get rid of Zika-carrying mosquitoes and whether that would be the right thing to do.
Number one, yes, it is possible. Not now, possibly within a year we will have the technology able to do it. Two, that's a much harder question that is really one for the half of the world's population that lives in areas where these mosquitoes live.
Okay, so on the face of it, you would say it's a no-brainer because you get rid of Zika, right? But what is the cost? Is there something in terms of the niche this mosquito occupies in a food chain that makes it more difficult?
Well, there's two species that spread Zika and dengue and chikungunya and yellow fever. Note that dengue and yellow fever between them kill roughly 60,000 people per year. Wow. So they're fairly nasty on their own, never mind the new plague of Zika. But these mosquitoes are, well, they span the globe, primarily in the tropical regions. But most of that region, they're invasive. So one of the vectors, Aedes aegypti, is native to the Mediterranean region. The other, Aedes albopictus, is native to Southeast Asia. And they're invasive everywhere else in the world. And that means that ecologically, they're very unlikely to be required. They're probably not doing anything important in the rest of the world. In fact, they're disruptive invaders. In Hawaii, for example, they are helping to drive native Hawaiian birds extinct by spreading bird parasites. So there are reasons why we might want to remove them from the Americas, from Australia, etc., even apart from the fact that they spread diseases to humans. Ecologically speaking, that would be a good thing to do. The challenge is, can we do that without also getting rid of them in Eurasia and Northern Africa? That's a different story.
And what is the difference? Am I to take from that the inference that they actually do some good or serve some better purpose in Eurasia and Northern Africa?
Only that they might. And now, good from the perspective of humans, very unlikely. It's possible that they pollinate some flowers. It's very unlikely that those flowers are not pollinated by anything else. There haven't been a lot of studies looking at what exactly do mosquitoes do? What other species depend on them? Clearly other species eat them, either in larval form or in adult form. So bats eat the adult forms. But when people have looked at it, specifically at the species that spread human diseases, they find, yes, okay, there are mosquitoes in the stomachs of bats, but the bats eat a lot of different kinds of mosquitoes. There are 3,500 species of mosquitoes in the world, and only a dozen or so are any good at spreading human disease. So 12 or so out of 3,500. Is the ecosystem going to notice? We don't know. Probably not, but we don't know for sure. So how much are you willing to bet? Are you willing to risk it in exchange for getting rid of these diseases?
That's the big question, isn't it? How much are you willing to bet? Because on the face of it, actually you would be willing to bet a reasonable amount to eradicate dengue and Zika and all of those things. But actually, if for some reason they're contributing something we don't know about, the consequences could be disastrous.
I am exceedingly doubtful that it could ever be disastrous, simply because we have done some studies of this. And what's more, there have been attempts to locally suppress populations of mosquitoes. So there's this British company, Oxitec, which has been releasing sterile male mosquitoes of these Aedes aegypti, the vector that spreads Zika, and they can suppress populations by 90% or so in a local area. It's fairly expensive. They need to do it continual releases. So you have to keep on releasing tens or hundreds of thousands of sterile male mosquitoes in order to keep the population down. But it works. And so then can we use that data as, in essence, a field trial? Because you can look at those ecosystems and say, is it different with most of the mosquitoes gone? If not, then we're probably fine.
That man is called Kevin Isfelt. He is a gene driver researcher at MIT. When we went to do the interview, we joined him by Skype, and he had a cat sitting on his neck and his head. Unfortunately, when the interview began, the cat left. But quite a remarkable fellow. 6:15 on Checkpoint. Social Development Minister says anyone who posts on Facebook or Twitter about cheating the system is silly enough to get caught. That's a quote. Her comments come after RNZ today confirmed the Ministry of Social Development uses social media to investigate potential welfare fraudsters. Kate Pereira-Garcia reports.
The Ministry of Social Development insists its staff are too busy to sit around trawling the internet all day. But it says where it's investigating welfare fraud, social media is one of the tools it uses to gather information. And if a staff member happens across a potential fraud on Facebook or the like, they're obliged to notify the investigations team. The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says that's fair enough.
If they're silly enough to use social media to broadcast the fact that they're trying to defraud the taxpayer, well, then they're silly enough to get caught. It would only ever form part of the investigation. Benefit fraud is quite a considerable effort goes into finding that and dealing with that.
Anne Tolley says her department does not keep a record of when people's social media accounts are monitored, and nor does it intend to. The Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, says just because something is posted on social media, that doesn't mean it's true or reliable.
Anyone who's spent any time on Twitter or even received emails knows that messages can be received in a number of different ways that are not intended by the author. So it will always pay for any official authority to take steps to check and verify any assumptions they're making. I would have real concerns if I found that there were people taking surreptitious steps to friend or otherwise misrepresent the means of access to a locked account to further an inquiry.
John Edwards says there's no law regulating gossip, but people should be aware that what they're putting online could reach a far wider audience than they intend. The beneficiary advocate, Kay Brereton, believes beneficiaries should be told if their social media accounts are being monitored.
It's breach of privacy in the way that people don't expect that that's going to be happening. It's like employers, I guess, who are using people's Facebook pages to check them out as well.
It's not really a breach of privacy, is it, though, because this is information people are putting out in the public sphere?
Yeah, it isn't a breach of privacy in the strict sense of the terms, but it's a breach of what you feel like is your private information that you think you've only put out there for friends.
A timely reminder for everyone to check your privacy settings and perhaps reconsider posting anything that you don't want the whole world to see. For Checkpoint, Kate Pereira-Garcia.
Thanks, Kate. Hundreds of bus drivers, NZ bus drivers in Auckland, worked to rule today in protest at what they say are long hours, poor conditions and low pay. So what are those jobs like? Well, I caught up with one bus driver, Phil Morgan, during a break. Phil, what time did you start this morning?
I officially signed on at 7:30 this morning. I've just finished my first half. I'm about to have a meal break. That's 5 hours behind the wheel of a bus, driving through heavy traffic throughout central Auckland. Quite a stressful occupation.
When you say you finished your first half, you went from 7:30 till 12:30. What break did you have in that time?
At the end of each run, possibly around about 5 to 7 minutes. That's it. A normal working day would be around about 9 hours driving.
And that doesn't include your breaks? That's 9 hours plus breaks?
Correct.
And so what sort of nick are you in at the end of 9 hours on Auckland roads?
Oh, look, you're dead tired. Most drivers, particularly those working the broken shifts, all they can do when they're finished is go home, have their dinner, go to bed, forget the family. I've got to be up again at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to work. That's it. That's a bus driver's life in central Auckland.
So what are you after?
What we're after really is, it's not all about the cash. We're after an increase, of course, but it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's nothing that other bus companies haven't settled on very recently. What we're after is conditional changes. We're looking at the hours of work and the stress that they pile onto drivers. One of our major bugbears is the broken shifts have up to a 4-hour break in the middle of the day. We'd like to get that reduced to 3 hours, which is an industry standard in other bus companies.
So that's split shifting effectively.
That's
you do a morning
shifting.
shift, you have 4 hours off, and then you do an evening shift.
That's correct, John, yes.
And so how long does that make your day in total, including the 4 hours off in the middle?
Up to 13 hours a day, 5 days a week. Now, those 5 days a week can be any 5 days. They do include Saturday and Sunday. Fortunately, there was no such thing as a broken shift on the weekend, but they tend to make longer shifts on the weekend, not just an 8-hour shift. You're probably there all of Saturday or all of Sunday. The next day you spend recuperating. Once again, family misses out.
So, Phil, you started at 7:30 this morning. You're having your first break of any substance now at 12:30.
That's correct.
What happens now? What's the rest of your day?
The rest of my day is I will finish that meal break. I'll start my next trip just after 1 o'clock, and I will drive through till 6 o'clock.
So 7:30 till 6 with an hour off in the middle?
That's correct. That's correct.
In Auckland traffic?
Yes. Try that on for size. 5 days a week. There are other rosters I could tell you about that run up to 53 hours a week. Now that is a roster, that's a killer roster. We'd like to address those issues.
I was talking there with bus driver Phil Morgan. NZ Bus says today's industrial action caused minimal disruption for Auckland commuters, and they say they will talk with drivers. The talks will resume likely in the next couple of weeks. We're just getting lots of texts and correspondence about terrible traffic in the Pukirua Bay area, which is north of Wellington up the Kapiti coast. There appears to have been a crash there, a car on its roof, we've been told. Traffic backed up now a long way, a big tail. If it's that stretch of road along the waterfront, an accident there can clog up traffic for a long time. We'll try and get more details, but people saying that there's slow movement or no movement in the region of Pukirua Bay, and there is a crash blocking the road. Lots of people texting us to tell us that. 6:20 on Checkpoint. Members of Auckland's Chinese community want the government to toughen its stance on crime following the killing of Sean Tian last month. The 69-year-old grandmother was attacked and killed in her home in Te Atatu. We all remember it, of course. A group from the Chinese community picketed outside the High Court in Auckland this morning when 19-year-old Jaden Lee Strubant was appearing, charged with the murder. Mohammed Hassan reports.
Around 40 people held placards with a simple message to the government: get tougher on crime. And East Auckland resident Portia Mao says the killing of Sean Tian has sent shockwaves through the community.
This case makes people feared, especially old people. They don't feel safe at home. And this reflects a feeling that they really concerned about the safety of the community. And they hope that the law could be more tougher on criminals.
She says an online petition was signed by over 10,000 people, most of them Chinese New Zealanders. Another protester, Christine Chia, told RNZ News there needs to be a greater police presence in communities to protect elderly people. 70-year-old Seung Jiao lives in Henderson. Using another protester to translate, he says the problem of crime is weighing on his mind.
We want to be tough for this crime, and we want to feel safe in the community.
Protest organizer Cindy Zhang says Ms. Chian's death has had far-reaching effects, worrying Chinese travelers who are thinking about coming to New Zealand.
One of our community people said that some of her friends actually heard about this, and then they asked her before they travel here, is New Zealand safe enough? Are you sure? They're going to ask these questions, So that means something going on, something is changing.
She says none of the protesters knew Ms. Chian personally, but all felt they could now be targeted in their homes. Nationalist MP Zhang Yang says it's understandable why such a violent case would make some in the Chinese community feel unsafe.
When things happened to Chinese community, the Chinese community would feel more closely related and therefore more emotional. That is understandable, particularly because sometimes they feel that they can't communicate very well, and that would deepen their concern. So we are trying to assure the Chinese community that New Zealand still is a safe place.
Dr. Yang says the government is already doing a lot to reduce the recorded crime rate, which is at its lowest level since 1978. The latest crime statistics available for the 2014 year show the overall rate dropped about 3% from the previous year, although assault and sexual violence rates increased. Dr. Yang says there is still more that can be done, and increasing the police presence could be an option. For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
One of the country's best-loved landscapes this week became the proving ground in a national program to wipe out wasps. Wasps are estimated to cost the New Zealand economy somewhere in the region of $130 million a year in lost agricultural revenue through damage to bees, not to mention the fact they're thoroughly unpleasant creatures. Now, the Department of Conservation is using a new type of poison to control the pests, starting with the Abel Tasman National Park. Our Nelson reporter, Tracy Neal, went to see the plan in action.
Thanks, welcome guys. Just give you all a life jacket stick on.
There's a sea breeze building on Tasman Bay and we're off on a boat ride. Torrent Bay is our destination, about 1/3 of the way into the Abel Tasman National Park. A hard-hitting eradication program started there this week, carried out by the Department of Conservation and funded by local trust Project Janzoon and the Abel Tasman Foreshore Scenic Reserve Fund. Peter Gaze, a Project Janzoon ornithologist, explains what they're aiming to do.
The project we're seeing today is about the eradication of wasps along the whole length of the Great Walks track in Abel Tasman. This involves bait stations at regular intervals along the track. The wasps will take the bait, take it back to the nests, and the nests will be history within a matter of days.
Mr. Gay says wasps compete with native birds for honeydew, nectar and invertebrates. In greater numbers, they also prey on chicks. But they're also a pest for visitors to these conservation areas.
At the moment, visitors to this little bit of paradise can really have their holiday upset by encounters with wasps, either accidental, pushing through a nest, or just not watching their jam sandwich closely enough when they have a picnic. And, the results can be devastating.
Sebastian de Brun and Anneke van Laven, visiting from the Netherlands, were among the dozens or so on the beach at Torrent Bay Lagoon, swatting away wasps from their picnic lunch.
When you sit down or stand still, then you can't even notice that there are wasps.
And do they worry you?
Yeah, I know, but if you just sit still, everything is okay. If they get annoyed, then you get annoyed as well.
Australian visitors Ray and Ellie Owis from the hills behind Sydney were less concerned.
We've noticed just things flying past, but we just sort them off. We're from Australia, so we got wasps on steroids over there. So
Don't forget the Sydney
funwebs.
The funwebs
yeah.
we picked up out of our backyard.
Yeah, collected 2 the other day.
So wasps don't really bother us.
The Owises say they're just happy to be hiking in an area absent of things they really worry about, like snakes. Doc says past attempts at getting rid of wasps have been difficult and time-consuming. The breakthrough this time is a new protein bait called Vespex. Doc Biodiversity Ranger John Henderson takes us to the site of a nest marked by a pink ribbon and humming to the tune of hundreds of wasps.
That's how we refine stuff. And what we do is we monitor nests to make sure that we're killing them. And so what we're looking at here is a wasp nest in the side of the track at about head height. We're looking at maybe, I'd say, around about 100 wasps every minute coming and going, so it's quite a busy nest.
John says laying the bait traps are no walk in the park.
So there's bait lines all through that steep country you can see behind Torrent Bay there. We've run wasp bait stations through there.
It's quite steep country there. Is that quite an effort for staff to get the traps up there?
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty gnarly country to get around. And with the initial trap set out, it had to be a bait station every 100 metres, so whether it was the bottom of a gully or the top of a ridge, you had to sort of get up or down. So
Doc expects wasp control around the country to build over the coming years, now that the Vespex bait is more widely available. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
For those of you listening, that was a wonderful radio piece. For those of you watching it, Tracy filmed a lot of that on her phone. I'm in awe, Tracy. Incredible pictures. 6:27 We are hoping to talk whitebait in Christchurch. We'll do that tomorrow night because the man we were going to talk about it with is not with us, perhaps. They're running. Perhaps you're just frying them up in butter. Anyway, let's go to the States. John Greaves is going to talk about the primary in a moment. Big wins for Sanders and Trump. But President Obama proposed a $4.1 trillion spending plan for fiscal year 2017 in a final White House budget that met immediate Republican resistance. There's a surprise. I don't think Obama can inhale without meeting immediate Republican resistance, can he? But anyway, here's Deborah Lutterbeck from Reuters.
President Barack Obama's final budget proposal is delivered to Capitol Hill. His proposal includes $2.9 trillion in deficit reduction over 10 years, largely by curbing tax breaks for the wealthy and proposing new savings in the Medicare and Medicaid health care programs.
The budget that we're releasing today reflects my priorities.
The proposal gives the Democratic president, who leaves office in January, a chance to make a last pitch for funding.
It drives down the deficit. It includes smart savings on health care, immigration, tax reform. And it strengthens our national security by increasing defense spending and advancing our global leadership through diplomacy and through development.
The plan is primarily a political document, and it's unlikely to be embraced by the Republican-controlled Congress, although White House officials sought to play down the portrayal of the budget as dead on arrival, noting bipartisan support for cancer research, opiate addiction programs, and an expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, which helps low-income taxpayers.
We've got 30 seconds. Richie's on the phone from the traffic jam in Pukirua Bay. Richie, what's happening there?
Hey, John. We're just stuck in a bit of traffic, really. There's a bit of a serious accident that's happened here. There's a vehicle on its roof. The rescue helicopters just arrived, and traffic's at a standstill and has been for probably the last 45 minutes, probably.
Oh, dear. Are you northbound or southbound?
I'm heading southbound, coming from Paraparamu into Pukirua Bay, but both lanes jammed. Northbound's moving slightly, but there's a lot of personnel here working on the scenario. So
we appreciate that, Richie. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thanks for the live update from the traffic jam. We apologise for running 15 seconds over time, John Greaves. That ends Checkpoint for tonight. Here's World Watch.
You're listening to RNZ National, where it's 6:30. Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, Islamic State supporters in Indonesia jailed. Japan's wading fleet begins its minke whale hunt in the Antarctic, and scientists gather to discuss how climate change is affecting the movement of species. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. But first, 2 commuter trains have crashed head-on in southern Germany, killing at least 10 people and injuring more than 80 others. One of the trains was derailed and several carriages were overturned when the trains, which were travelling at high speed, collided on a bend. Deutsche Welle's Sylvia Schutt reports.
The wreckage at the scene was so mangled that emergency services needed hours to confirm that all of the survivors had been rescued from the trains. Meanwhile, the crews continued to search for bodies trapped inside. Shortly before 7 a.m, the 2 passenger trains collided head-on, with disastrous consequences. In addition to the dead, scores of people were injured, many of them seriously. One of the survivors described a scene of panic and fear as the trains made impact. Suddenly you could feel the train brake abruptly and there was a massive bang. My head was hurled forward and when I opened my eyes again, all was dark. All you could hear was people shouting and screaming. It's being called Germany's worst train crash in years. Transport Minister Alexander Dobrindt appeared shaken after visiting the scene.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, Herr Staatsminister Hermann und ich haben...
Minister Hermann and I have just seen the crash site for ourselves. It's a terrible scene. It's shocking how these 2 trains met each other on the tracks. One of the trains actually bored through the other train driver's cabin and then ripped the second carriage completely apart.
Komplett auseinandergerissen.
Yet the death toll could have been even worse. Because of the winter school holidays, the trains were not as full as they usually are so early in the morning. The trains belong to a subsidiary of the French firm Transdev, the largest local transport provider in Germany. It operates trains between Munich and the city of Rosenheim. Near Bad Aibling, where the accident happened, trains in both directions have to share the same line. The rescuers' main priority right now is to clear the debris from the line. But there is one question that remains to be answered in the coming days. How could a tragedy like this have happened?
Sylvia Schutt. In Jakarta, more than half a dozen Islamic State supporters have been jailed for conspiring with a terrorist group. It marks the first time Indonesians have been sent to prison for links to IS. They received between 2 and 5 years behind bars for training at military camps in Syria and recruiting for Islamic State at home. Samantha Hawley was at the West Jakarta District Court and filed this report.
One by one, they faced the panel of judges, and one by one, they were sentenced for their links to the Islamic State terrorist group. The longest jail time went to an Indonesian man known as Fakri. He received 5 years for recruiting Islamic State members at a mosque in West Jakarta and for running a pro-Islamic State, pro-violent website. Outside the court, Uzladin Hatjani, the lawyer for 6 of the 7 offenders, spoke to the press. They denied that they were involved with ISIS, he says, but they have accepted the judge's sentence anyway. An Indonesian meatball seller, Ahmad Junadi, who says he was lured to Syria with a promise of a large financial payment, will spend 3 years behind bars, a term he accepted in the courtroom without fuss. Most of those sentenced were directly linked to Abu Jandal, an Indonesian who's fighting for Islamic State in Syria and is considered one of the 3 Indonesian commanders wanting to make their mark as leaders there. Helmi Muhammad was sentenced to 3 years jail. He helped dozens of Indonesians travel to Syria, and the judges found had spent 2 weeks there himself. His lawyer is Abi